wind began as a whisper, that night barely touching the frozen trees that stood like black shadows along the empty highway in northern Alaska. Winter storms were not unusual, but everyone who lived there could feel when something was different. The air felt heavier, as if the sky itself was lowering closer to the earth. John Mercer felt it while driving his old pickup truck toward the research station. Where he worked, the snow had started falling hours earlier, soft and light, but now it struck the windshield with force like tiny needles. His radio crackled with static, then went silent. He tried adjusting it, but heard nothing except the howl of the wind, growing louder with every mile. John had lived in this region for 7 years, studying ice cores and climate patterns. He respected the blizzards, but he did not fear them until that night. The road ahead vanished beneath layers of white. The sky blended with the ground, creating a single, endless void. He slowed the truck, gripping the steering wheel as the headlights illuminated swirling snow that seemed to move with intention rather than chance. He felt watched. Even though he was alone for miles, the truck suddenly jolted as if something heavy had struck it from the side. John slammed the brakes, and the vehicle skidded before stopping completely. His heart pounded in his chest. He stepped out into the storm against his better judgment. The wind nearly knocked him over. The cold burned his skin instantly. He looked around, expecting to see a fallen tree or drifting ice, but there was nothing, just snow and darkness. Then he saw the footprints. They appeared suddenly, leading away from the side of the truck into the white abyss. The prints were deep, pressed hard into the snow as if made by something heavy. They were not human. The shape was wrong, too long, too wide. John felt his stomach tighten. He backed toward the truck, but as he did, the engine shut off. The headlights died, leaving him in complete darkness except for the faint glow of the storm-lit sky. Panic crept into his thoughts. He tried restarting the engine, but it refused to respond. The wind screamed around him, louder than before, almost like voices overlapping. He told himself it was just the storm, but his instinct said otherwise. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped back outside. The beam cut through the snow, revealing more footprints now circling the truck slowly, deliberately. John shouted into the storm, asking if anyone was there. His voice was swallowed. Instantly, no answer came, but the footprints stopped moving. He felt something shift in the air, like the moment before an avalanche. He turned slowly, shining the flashlight toward the tree line far off the road, and that was when he saw it. A tall shape stood among the trees, barely visible through the snow. It did not move yet. John knew it was watching him. The outline was wrong for any animal he knew. Its limbs were too long, its posture unnatural. As he stared, the flashlight flickered and went out, leaving him blind again. Something struck the side of the truck, hard enough to dent the metal. John screamed and ran to the driver's seat, slamming the door behind him. He locked it, though. He knew it would not help. The truck rocked violently, as if something massive was leaning against it. The sound of scraping metal filled the cabin, followed by a low vibration that felt like a growl, resonating through the steel. Then just as suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The storm still raged, but the pressure was gone. The truck no longer shook. John sat frozen, afraid to breathe. Minutes passed that felt like hours. He slowly reached for the ignition again and turned the key. The engine coughed and roared back to life. The headlights flicked on, revealing nothing but empty snow. He did not question it. He drove as fast as he could toward the station, never looking back. When he arrived, his co-workers noticed the damage to the truck, and his pale, shaking hands, he told them what happened, but they dismissed it as stress and isolation. The storm cleared by morning, and a search of the road revealed no tracks, no signs of anything unusual. The footprints were gone, as if they had never existed. John quit his job 2 weeks later and left Alaska forever. Years later, he admitted that sometimes during winter storms, he still hears the wind change tone and feels that same sensation of being watched, even thousands of miles away. The second story comes from a remote mountain village in northern Norway where blizzards can erase entire landscapes in minutes. The village of Skarheim was small, with fewer than 100 residents. Most families had lived there for generations and shared old stories about the mountains, stories they no longer told outsiders. In February of 2012, a historic storm swept through the region, cutting off all roads and communication. Lines went down and the village was isolated completely for the first 2 days. People stayed indoors, trusting their supplies and their experience, but on the third night something strange began to happen. Liv Anderson lived alone at the edge of the village closest to the mountain pass. She was awakened by a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was rhythmic, slow and heavy like footsteps, crunching through deep snow right outside her house. She froze in bed listening. The steps stopped directly at her front door. Then came a knock. No one knocked during blizzards. It was an unspoken rule. Liv grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. She moved quietly to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to look out. Her porch light illuminated nothing but swirling snow. She saw no one yet. The knocking came again, louder this time, shaking the door. She shouted, asking who was there. Her voice trembled, but no answer came. Instead, she heard breathing low and strained. Right on the other side of the door, the handle began to move, slowly as if tested by careful hands. Liv backed away, grabbing a fireplace poker for defense. Her heart raced as the handle stopped moving and the breathing faded into the storm. The next morning, Liv discovered footprints leading from her door, straight toward the mountain pass. They were barefoot despite the extreme cold. The prints were deep and uneven, as if the person had been injured or dragging themselves. The villagers gathered to inspect them and fell silent. Some elders crossed themselves, refusing to speak. By nightfall, more residents reported knocks at their doors. Some heard voices calling their names from outside, mimicking loved ones. Others saw shapes moving just beyond the reach of their lights. No one opened their doors. The elders finally spoke, warning everyone to stay inside, no matter what. They told an old legend about those who die in the mountains. During storms, their bodies are never found and their spirits wander, seeking warmth, seeking entry. On the fourth night, the storm reached its peak. The wind screamed through the village. Like a living thing, doors rattled, windows shook, and somewhere outside something wailed in agony. It did not sound human, yet it carried emotion so raw it brought many villagers to tears. Inside Liv's house, the knocking returned, louder, more desperate than before. She heard a voice now, sounding exactly like her late father, begging to be let in. She screamed, covering her ears, refusing to listen. The knocking turned violent, pounding against the door again and again until cracks formed in the wood. Then, without warning, it stopped. The storm began to die down. Shortly after, roads were cleared the next day and rescue teams arrived. They found strange marks on several houses, deep gouges in wood and stone. Footprints led away toward the mountains, but vanished halfway up the slope. No bodies were ever discovered. The elders never spoke of it again. Liv moved away months later. She says she still dreams of that voice calling her name through the wind. The third story begins in the dead center of Antarctica, a place where white stretches forever and silence presses against the mind like weight in the winter season. The sun disappears for months, and darkness becomes normal. The Concordia Research Facility is one of the most isolated places on Earth, staffed by a small international crew who prepare for isolation, knowing there will be no rescue, no evacuation, no outside help until winter ends. In June of 2015, 12 researchers remained at the station as temperatures dropped below -80 degrees. Outside survival without protection was impossible. Inside the facility, routines were strict to keep minds stable. Everyone worked, ate, and slept on schedules, but slowly, something began to break that order. Dr. Elias Moreau, a French glaciologist, kept a private journal. During the first weeks of darkness, his entries were calm, scientific routine observations, but midway through July, his writing changed. He described hearing footsteps in the outer corridors at night, even though movement after midnight was prohibited. He blamed exhaustion at first, but the sounds continued, heavy, slow, pacing back and forth outside his sleeping quarters. Security cameras showed nothing. The hallways were empty when reviewed. Yet the sounds were heard by others too. A mechanic from Russia reported knocking from inside the walls. A Meteorologists claim she saw a shadow standing at the end of the main corridor that vanished when approached. The station commander ordered psychological evaluation suspecting isolation stress. But then the storm came. A massive blizzard descended on the facility without warning. Winds exceeded 200 miles per hour, snow buried the lower levels entirely. Antennas froze and communication with the outside world was lost. The crew was officially alone. During the second night of the storm, the power flickered. Emergency lights bathed the station in dim red shadows. That was when the screaming started. It echoed through the ventilation system, distorted and distant like someone crying from far underground. The sound rose and fell in long, agonized waves. Some researchers covered their ears. Others dropped to the floor, shaking. The sound was not human, yet it carried pain, unmistakable suffering. Dr. Moreau wrote that the screaming seemed to move through the station, traveling from one section to another as if searching. Security footage later reviewed showed something impossible. Cameras captured a tall, thin figure walking through sealed corridors. Its body appeared stretched, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. It did not trigger motion. Sensors' doors did not open, yet it passed through them as if they were air. When the footage reached the moment it turned toward the camera, the feed cut to static. That night, one of the crew went missing. His name was Luca Bianchi, an Italian engineer. His room showed no signs of struggle. His bed was untouched. His boots and cold weather gear were still neatly placed by the door. The only unusual thing was frost covering the inside walls of his room as if exposed to outside air. The blizzard continued for days, trapping fear inside the station. The remaining crew stayed together, refusing to be alone. They heard footsteps circling them, whispers just beyond, hearing range and sometimes breathing close behind them when no one was there. On the fifth night, the screams returned louder than before. Their sound seemed to come from beneath the floor. The station commander ordered everyone to stay in the common area. As they waited, the temperature inside began to drop. Rapidly, frost formed on equipment. Ice spread along the walls like veins. Then the floor began to crack. A section of metal buckled inward, and from the darkness below, something moved. It did not fully emerge, but what they saw was enough. A pale, elongated hand reached upward, fingers too many, too long. Clawing at the edge, the screaming intensified, becoming deafening. The crew fled, sealing off that section forever. The storm ended 2 days later. Communications were restored. Emergency evacuation was ordered immediately. Rescue teams arrived to find the station partially frozen. From the inside, sections were destroyed. Logs were incomplete, missing hours of recordings. Official reports blamed equipment failure and psychological collapse. Luca Bianchi was listed as missing, presumed dead. No mention was made of the footage or the journal, which vanished before investigators arrived. Dr. Moreau never spoke publicly about Antarctica again, but years later he mailed copies of his final journal pages anonymously to a journalist. The last entry contained only one sentence: "It followed us there because it hates the warmth." These 3 stories were never meant to be connected, yet people who study extreme environments have noticed a pattern. Wherever cold becomes absolute, wherever storms isolate humans, completely, something else seems to move within the blizzard. Watching, waiting, listening. The final account does not come from a journal or official report. It comes from a series of voice recordings discovered years later, buried in an abandoned ranger station in the Yukon Territory. The tapes were damaged by cold, but enough survived to piece together what happened during the winter of 1998. Ranger Thomas Hale had worked alone that season, monitoring wildlife migration and maintaining emergency shelters along a remote stretch of frozen wilderness. His nearest neighbor was over 60 miles away. Winter isolation was part of the job, and Thomas had done it before without incident. He was experienced, calm and methodical, which makes what happened next even harder to dismiss. The first recordings are routine. He talks about snow depth, temperature drops, and the silence that settles after heavy snowfall. His voice is steady, almost relaxed, but as December progresses, subtle changes appear. He mentions strange weather shifts, sudden drops in pressure, blizzards forming without warning. He laughs it off at first, calling it bad luck. Then one night during a whiteout storm, Thomas records something different. His voice is low, cautious. He says he can hear movement outside the station despite visibility being near zero. He insists it is not an animal. The steps are too slow, too deliberate. They stop directly outside his door. He opens the door briefly against his instincts. Wind and snow rush inside, but there is nothing there. No tracks, no disturbance, just untouched snow stretching endlessly. He closes the door shaken and locks it. Over the next weeks, the recordings grow darker. Thomas describes hearing knocking during storms, always 3 slow impacts spaced evenly. A part he never answers. He never opens the door again, but the knocking continues night after night, sometimes followed by scratching along the walls. In one tape, he whispers that he hears breathing inside the station. Though he is alone, he walks through each room recording as he goes. His voice trembles when he reaches the storage area where frost coats the ceiling despite the heater running at full power. He stops speaking abruptly when something moves in the darkness beyond the shelves. The tape cuts off. Another recording resumes hours later. Thomas sounds exhausted. He says the blizzard outside has not stopped. For 3 days straight, winds that scream. Constantly, he claims the storm is wrong, moving in circles around the station as if trapped. He says the knocking has stopped, but now something else is happening.
He says it is calling him.
Not shouting, not whispering, but speaking clearly, using his name. The voice comes from the wind. It sounds familiar, comforting, almost kind. He admits he nearly answered before realizing something important. The voice never speaks when the storm is quiet, only when the blizzard is at its strongest. As January begins, Thomas reports physical changes inside the station. Ice forming in patterns that look intentional, shapes along the walls that melt when stared at directly. He records a long silence broken only by his breathing. Then very faintly, another sound can be heard beneath the wind, low rhythmic hum, almost like chanting. The final tape is the most disturbing. Thomas speaks calmly, too calmly. He says the storm has finally stopped. The silence outside feels heavier than the noise ever did. He walks to the door and opens it despite everything. He learned cold air rushes in, but there is no wind, no snow falling, just endless white and a sky without color. He says there are footprints leading away from the station. They circle, once then continue toward the trees. He follows them against reason. His voice grows distant as he walks. He says the cold no longer hurts. He says he understands now. He stops walking abruptly. His breathing changes, slow, deep, almost reverent. He describes seeing figures standing between the trees, tall, thin shapes barely visible against the snow. They are waiting, not moving, not threatening, just watching. His last words are spoken softly with awe rather than fear. They were here long before us. They live in the storm, and they do not want to be alone. The recording ends there. Search teams found the station weeks later. Thomas Hale was never recovered. The footprints ended at the tree line and vanished. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication he ever returned. Locals say during severe blizzards, in that region you can still hear 3 slow knocks echoing across the frozen valleys. Rangers now avoid the area during winter storms. Some refuse to speak about it at all.